Welcome back, everyone. This is Dr. Foojan Zeine, and I am excited to have Dr. Stephen Gardner with me. He's an internist at Massachusetts General Hospital, assistant professor of medicine at Harvard Medical School, and past medical director of Massachusetts Special Olympics. He's the past winner of the Harvard Medical School Humanism in Medicine Award. Stephen is a prominent photographer whose images focus on the resilience of people facing adversity and the compassion of caregivers. His work has been exhibited in Boston and Martha's Vineyard, where he is a volunteer physician at Camp Jabberwocky, the location and inspiration for many of his stories, and especially his latest book, Jabberwocky: Lessons of Love from a Boy Who Never Spoke. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Foojan. My pleasure.
You got inspired. And I can sense as I was going through the book that you learned and got inspired by your son. Your son came to your world, and every day he surprised you with so many ways of being.
Yeah,
that was amazing. So please share about that. And then how come Jabberwock? How come that became the name of your book and became the name of so many of the experiences?
okay. Thanks for having me on the show, first of all. So our son Graham was born with a condition called cerebral palsy. And it turns out that cerebral palsy has sort of a wide range of severity. So some people have a really mild case and they can talk and they can walk with a limp maybe. But other people, including our son, have more severe disabilities. And in his case, something injured his brain during gestation with his mom. We never found out what it was. So he was unable to speak, unable to walk, unable to really fend for himself in conventional ways like with eating. So it was a bit of a shock, obviously, for first-time parents, learning that you're going to have a child with a significant disability. But as we went along with him, we began to think about abilities and disabilities somewhat differently. And in his case, there was sort of this radiance inside of him that really has no other name except love, that just made it incredibly enjoyable and rewarding to be around him, whatever we were doing. And in the beginning, we thought we probably wouldn't be able to do some of the conventional things that parents do with children, like riding bicycles and things like that. But as time went on, we realized that we actually could do almost anything we set our minds to. We had some role models in the Boston area, like the father and son, Rick and Dick Hoyt, who were in the Boston Marathon every year for 32 years, with the dad pushing his son who had cerebral palsy. When Graham was about 10, we discovered that there was a special camp on the island of Martha's Vineyard called Camp Jabberwocky, which was one of the very first sleepover camps for people with serious disabilities in the United States, having started way back in the 1950s. So Graham was accepted there as a camper, and I sort of rode his coattails in there as one of the camp doctors and got to hang out there. And it was a life-changing experience, becoming part of this extraordinary, eclectic, noisy, silly sometimes community of people with and without disabilities who would share part of their summer together, tease one another, laugh together, have each other's back, encourage one another to dream, but in the end, form a family that we all were proud to belong to. And it gave all of us a very, very special sense of belonging and experiencing this thing that we now call Jabberwocky love.
As I was reading your book, it brought me to, and I'm a crier, so don't worry if I have emotion.
I am too. I cry at a rock fight, so try to beat that, but go ahead.
Yeah, I came from Iran when I was about 12 and a half, and I went to a boarding school in Arizona. And I was like, didn't know English and just came into this boarding school with a lot of obviously like affluent children who had a little bit of chip on their shoulders and all of that. So one of the girls who was in my dormitory, she had cerebral palsy. And I remember when you brought this conversation of Jabberwocky love, and I remember the first person that I ever received love from was her. We became best friends through the time that we were at school, and she had a lot of difficulty sometimes walking, or her hands and her feet had had very difficulty in doing stuff. And I remember even that after like a couple of months where I was able to speak English and be a part of the whole school, a lot of people would come in, and other girls would come in and say, come into our group and click, but you have to not be friends with her. And it was like, let me choose here. Why would I not want to be friends with someone who gives me so much love and this way of, like the real love, being human, with not caring about anything else and just being the two of us. So I was reading your book, and it really brought back a lot of those years for me.
Foojan, I can contrast your story with a story that's in the book about a school. So when Graham was about, I guess, 8 or 9 or 10 years old, he was placed in an inclusion program in a middle school. So the idea was that a kid with a disability would be included in regular classroom activities and not just spend the whole day in a different space. His homeroom teacher came up with an idea that was quite fantastic. She called it the designated driver. And the idea was that she would assign one of the other kids, the able-bodied kids, each day to push Graham in his wheelchair to recess, to assemblies, to all the school activities. And what turned out to happen was that becoming the designated driver was a coveted role for fourth graders. So those youngsters at that age already knew that there was no reason to be afraid of someone who was different from them. In fact, they embraced the idea that he was different from them and became his inner circle of advocates and pals for the rest of his life. So far from an experience of cruelty, or anything negative, we had just this overwhelmingly positive experience in middle school, thanks to his peers and thanks to this remarkable teacher of his.
Yes. So share a little bit about what you mean by the term Jabberwocky love.
So Jabberwocky love to me means a sense of belonging. There was a writer, Marina Keegan, who used the term the opposite of loneliness. She was writing an essay and she was trying to figure out a word that would describe the feeling of being among like-minded people who care deeply about one another, who challenge one another, who encourage one another to dream and try things that are difficult, maybe argue a little bit, disagree about things, but in the end, care very deeply about one another and become together a community where everyone is equal. And in that community, whatever a person can do is welcomed. And whatever they can do, they're considered to be contributing equally to the community and to the family. So I think we all want that feeling of being part of something. We all want that sense of the opposite of loneliness. We want to be in this environment where we're essentially all one family.
You wrote this beautiful lullaby for him that is in your book. I'm yours and you're mine, and we are part of one design, like branches on a tree, waves out on the sea. And you say, no, sung in 2 parts harmony, and all I really want to do is share this life with you.
Great.
until we meet again. So how was it to be part of his life? What did he teach you as you were moving forward, and Cynthia, your wife?
So I think being around Graham simply taught us to have open hearts and open minds when we meet people, whoever they are, and to really embrace differences that we have, rather than the opposite that's typically happening in our culture right now, where we tend to be polarizing and suspicious of one another in some cases. So just the notion that we're all in this together. We don't leave anybody on the side of the road. We bring everyone along for the journey, for the experience of life. And we all have something to offer. We all have something to receive. One of my patients told me that even the poorest person in the world has something to offer, and the richest has something to receive. So that's also, I think, a part of the Jabberwocky philosophy.
It seems like there's different priorities in our life, and different times in our life we choose those different priorities. And sometimes when you're stripped away from some abilities, let's say, or some opportunities, it is very it's interesting how we cherish the opportunities and that we have, and how we extend those opportunities in that way. So, and I've seen a lot of this, the matter of when all you have is life or death, when all you have is a particular way of being in your body. If all you have at this point is what is in front of you, then how amazing you'll make that to be.
Yeah.
I don't know if that made any sense.
I think it made sense. So with Graham, I think we discovered just being together was joyful. We didn't have to be riding bicycles. In the end, it turned out we could ride bicycles. We found ways to do that. And we found ways to ski even on the snow. But underneath that was the sense that even if we were at home, listening to music, sitting in front of a fire in the wintertime, just being together was enough. And condensing everything down, it just meant that we were experiencing the love of a child and his parents. His mom was equally remarkable and equally strong and amazing as a mom, and responsible for a lot of things, good things that happened to him. So that love was what it really came down to, learning to just be together and enjoy the presence of this moment being together.
In your book, you say God was the first one to cry. Can you share a bit about that?
Yeah. When Graham was 10, he got very sick and had to be in the ICU at Children's Hospital. And so we had the same sort of existential questions that any parents would have in that situation. Like, why is this happening to our child? One of the hospital chaplains gave us a book to read from a rabbi named Harold Kushner. And the book was called When Bad Things Happen to Good People. And in that story, he tries to sort out whether God can be both good and omnipotent. Because if God were omnipotent, why would God allow terrible things to happen to children or anyone else for that matter? So I think Rabbi Kushner concluded that God is good, but not omnipotent. I was having this discussion in my office one day with a patient who was studying theology. And I hit him with that question about, can God be good and omnipotent? We talked about it for a while. But about 3 days later, I got a letter at home from him. And it simply said, "Dear Dr. Gardner, I want you to know that I feel that when Graham passed away, God was the first one to cry." Mm-hmm. So I agree with Rabbi Kushner. I think the goodness of God is present in the love that's around us, and the people who rally when we're facing adversity. But God does not want terrible things to happen to anybody.
Right. You decided to share your experience and Graham's experience in this book. You're a physician, you work with illnesses all day, and you also had your own personal experience with your son. What was the reason you decided that you wanted to share this? What were the points that you wanted the world to know, and how do you think the world needed this book now?
So when Graham passed away, which was about 10 years ago, his mom and I were somewhat surprised when we started receiving a lot of condolence cards. Specifically, I think it came out to be 750 condolence cards. And we realized that there was something about this boy who never spoke that was reaching people beyond his family, even beyond our friends and neighbors. And that his message of just goodness and love and carpe diem, living in the moment, seemed to be inspiring other people, not just friends and family. So even when we went to the memorial service at a church in Marblehead, Massachusetts, that church was full, and there were people outside sort of in a line hoping to get in. So it became evident there was something about this boy almost ethereal that touched people that he ran into. So the question was maybe share that story with a wider audience and see if it touches other strangers, people that are not necessarily our friends and family. And particularly, as I said a few minutes ago, at a moment in time when the world seems to be filled with a lot of dissonance, and we're not on the same page a lot of the time. So assuming maybe that his message would be timely right now.
And we saw, especially with the pandemic, a lot changed for the whole world this past year. Many people no longer had the connection of face-to-face, being with other people. They became isolated. They became lonely. They became afraid and couldn't even trust being around people who they really loved because they were afraid that they would get an illness. Or, even the illness became, in some level, a point of feud, whether it became a political feud or just a normal life feud about why are you wearing a mask or not, or why are you, not coming to see me or not. And it just became very, and I'm just talking about United States. I'm not even talking about the rest of the world and how it, it impacted them. So if we could take some of the lessons from what Graham went through and you also experienced with him, and as you put it out, especially since you probably also saw a lot being in the hospitals and working in the hospitals, what could you share with us, bringing these two worlds together, the world of Jabberwocky love with what was going on in the pandemic and for everyone?
That's a wonderful question. First of all, Jabberwocky would be the polar opposite of social distancing. So there's not a second at Camp Jabberwocky where people aren't hugging other people. As I researched that chapter for my book, I realized that we actually have nerve endings in our fingers and elsewhere that tell us that we're experiencing what they call emotional touch. So a mother's caress or cradling a baby is experienced as a unique form of emotion. And when we experience that, we actually change hormonally, at least momentarily. So our stress hormones go down and the feel-good hormones go up, like endorphins, and oxytocin is another one. So there's actually sort of a scientific reason why laughing and being silly and being in close contact with other people makes us feel good. And as you just pointed out, the pandemic took that opportunity away from a lot of us. So we're very excited to be going back to camp in 1 week for the first time in 2 years, because we missed last summer for the very first time. And it's a date on the calendar that we mark And we look at that date for the rest of the year as the date when we get to go to this magical place and experiencing that opposite of loneliness, that Jabberwocky love, that sort of opposite of social distancing.
So part of what you're sharing is how to be together with touch and being in each other's presence. There's a way of being in each other's presence, which I think that it changes. It's an assumption, and you tell me if it's accurate or not. I think when it shows up in the world of disability, there's a stigma with disability. There's a fear of judgment around it. There's so many things around it that it's almost like if I break through this this cloud, like this dark cloud that is around it, and then I go inside is filled with love.
Yeah.
When I go beyond the fear of the stigma or the fear of judgment. Is that accurate a bit?
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Okay.
So
if you and I take the same conversation and see, like, if we take what's going on in the world, a lot of it is just judgment around, you know, whatever we think. We each have an opinion and we think we're right. And obviously, if I'm right, the other person must be wrong. And we go into this space of judgment. And
Yeah.
it's like, how can we penetrate the space and go inside the space, which then there can be an utter level of love and acceptance for each other as beings, as human beings, regardless of what all of our abilities are. And this is one of the things that I experienced reading your book and sensing from you that that's what you experienced at the Jabberwocky camp, which are people who are together. Some have different types of disabilities, some have different types of illnesses, some don't. And they're together in order to be together. In order to is only to be together.
Yes.
Versus proving something or, you know, anything else. So you can see the judgment goes away and the being together becomes the priority.
That's really well said. So at Jabberwocky, the difference between a camper and a counselor is blurred or even disappears. The idea that there are some people who are giving and other people who need help, that blurs and that almost disappears. And it becomes instead one family in which everybody's thought of as an equal and they contribute whatever they can. When we leave the island after camp, we always ask that question, why can't the so-called real world be more like Camp Jabberwocky? And that's a tough question. It's beyond my level of expertise to answer a question like that. But I know that those of us who've been touched by Camp Jabberwocky, both the campers and all the volunteers, will leave the island at the end of the summer with a nugget of that dream inside of us. The dream that people can live together as a family, can celebrate their differences, can have open hearts and minds. And as we leave the island, we have the wherewithal to take that nugget of feeling with us back home, wherever we came from, and hopefully not let the real world sort of beat it out of us in the weeks and months that follow. So that's sort of, I guess you could say, the ripple effect of a magical place. The butterfly flapping its wings. You can have a relatively small institution or a relatively small entity that has far-reaching effects if people can keep those things in their hearts.
I remember, for example, going to India to an ashram at one point, and this place was not necessarily a religious, like attached to any type of a religious foundation. Although it was for Brahma Kumaris, but it was more like conversation was about just love and acceptance and higher wisdom. And it was like 10,000 people there at one point. And what you got from them is people from all walks of life, all types of, background who were there. But they were there to interact with each other as human beings. And a lot of the other pieces were not necessarily relevant in the time that they were there. So obviously in real life, a lot of other stuff will become relevant because of our roles. Like we have a role, you have a role in the hospital as a physician. I have a role as a psychotherapist in, my practice and different places. So each role might create a construct, but I'm sensing more and more in what you had experienced in the camp and what you had experienced with Graham expressed to the rest of the world, where they had 700 people, sending a message of what brought Graham to them, was concentrating on who he was and what he could offer in that moment with another human being, without all the other kind of constructs of the roles. All the roles need to be there, but it seemed like that would be the light, that would be the essence. And then the conversation would be, how can we flourish that essence?
When I first went to Jabberwocky, which was 25 years ago, I had already been a doctor for a while, so I'd been surrounded by kind-hearted nurses and doctors and therapists of all kinds for years. But when I arrived at Jabberwocky and looked around at what I saw among the volunteers who were counselors for the campers, I was actually stunned, even though I'd been a witness to kindness and compassion throughout my adult life. But when I saw a 15-year-old girl from the island who seemed to be able to take care of a completely disabled adult 24 hours a day without any problem and with nothing but laughter and smiles, that really caused me to step back and take notice. And I began to think that people behave that way, passionately, compassionately, because of what they've seen in their lives. So in this case, this young woman had seen her older sister, 3 or 4 years older, as a full camp counselor, and come over and hung around the camp for a few days at a time and watched her older sister in action, demonstrating that fantastic combination of smarts, compassion, and humor. And so naturally, the youngster wanted to be like her older sister. So in terms of the old argument of environment versus genetics, nature versus nurture, I came away concluding that what we see in other people, how we see other people behaving, really imprints itself on us, especially when we're younger. And we become, in a way, we become what we see.
Who did you change to be after? I mean, you were a physician before, and then you went through your experience with Graham, and then went through the experience of seeing the Jabberwocky camp. How did it change you in your profession as a physician?
I would just say it made me a more humane physician. I hope I was to begin with, but I think it gave me the feeling that I needed to take a deep breath more often and slow down and really try to listen to people more carefully and understand where they were coming from, and recognize that every single one of them was unique. Every single one of them deserved to be seeking help from someone else. Sort of back to that idea that we're all in this together. So whoever came in, it didn't matter to me too much whether they had insurance or not, or what their background was. But I think from Graham, I just tried to take away the notion of treating every single person as respectfully as possible and with as close to an open heart and open mind as I could.
And the message that you're having, that we're all in this together, it really feels, hits home, especially with the concept of pandemic around the world. This wasn't just something that happened to one of us or a group of people. This is something that happened around the world for all of us.
Yeah.
How we behaved and how we, interacted with each other, or took responsibility for our own life and others, really could set this, path for all of us in a sense.
Yeah, indeed. I was just going to share one of my favorite expressions with you from Mr. Rogers. I hope your listeners or viewers have all had a chance to see the movies about him. But he said, the only thing that really changes this world is when one person gets the idea that love can abound and be shared. And I think that described perfectly Helen Land, the founder of Camp Jabberwocky. Although she might have added an addendum to that, which she might have said something like, the second thing that really changes the world is laughter that can abound and be shared. So that ethos, that philosophy is prevalent in a lot of places, but it sort of gets buried sometimes under, the day-to-day frantic nature of our lives.
Very true. In 1 minute or so, if there's anything that we haven't really touched upon and you really want our listeners and viewers to know about you, about Graham, or your message in your book.
I think I'll just defer to Winnie the Pooh. And I'll say that there was a story in which Piglet asked Pooh, how do you spell love? And Pooh says, Piglet, you don't spell love, you feel it. So I think, Graham was somebody who allowed everybody that ran into him to feel the love that came out of him, and hopefully to pass it along. And we all have that capacity within ourselves. We just have to try to keep it going, even when it's tough sometimes.
Absolutely, yes. Everyone, Dr. Stephen Gardner, the book is Jabberwocky: Lessons of Love from a Boy Who Never Spoke. And you can find the book at jabberwockybook.com or Amazon and anywhere else that the books are there. Thank you so much for the opportunity. And I love the book, and I hope, and I know it's not a hope, I know that anyone who reads this book, the first thing that it does, it touches your heart and it touches your inner being. And this is what Graham has given you and everyone around. And thank you for sharing it with everyone else in the world.
Foojan, thank you for having me on. It's my pleasure.
Take good care of yourself. And for all of you who are out there, create an amazing world for yourself and everyone around you. And until next week, bye-bye.
Togetherness Media. Togethernessmedia.com.